It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Intense pressure on ministers to publish the full list of schools at risk of collapse due to dangerous concrete. We go inside a school forced to close classrooms with calls for an urgent investigation into how many other buildings are unsafe. £500 million pledged to rescue Britain's biggest steel producer, but thousands of jobs are still at risk.
Without this, you may as well take the word port out of Port Talbot. Without the steel industry, we have nothing, absolutely nothing. It's in our blood.
Violence in Tel Aviv. More than 150 people injured in clashes between Eritrean asylum seekers and Israeli police.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Blast off to the sun. India launches a rocket mission 1 week on from landing on the moon. And the show won't go on as actors avoid the Venice Film Festival because of the Hollywood strike. A new star in New York. Britain's Jack Draper reaches the last 16 at the US Open. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. A national emergency. That's how opposition politicians have described the presence of dangerous concrete in hundreds of schools and other public buildings across the UK. Just over a day out from the start of term, the full list of affected schools still hasn't been released, leaving thousands of parents and teachers unaware whether their school will open as planned next week. Sky News understands ministers will only release the full list when all parents have been informed and alternative arrangements have been made. Rob Harris reports from a school in Colchester in Essex, which has been forced to shut half of its classrooms.
This is one of 4 computer rooms that's out. And this maths classroom is out of action. Also, this maths room.
A glimpse into classrooms declared unsafe. And a head teacher who doesn't know when lessons will be allowed again here.
And this English classroom is also out. It's incredibly disruptive. Teachers will have planned what they're doing. They're now going to have to undo all of those plans.
The danger is unseen, with the peril not obviously apparent. Honeywood School in Essex is one of more than 100 education facilities built using RAC. Reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete that deteriorates and leaves buildings prone to collapsing. 340 of the 800 pupils will have to stay home rather than returning here from summer holidays next week. Classrooms now condemned after the school had earlier been told their RAC issues weren't critical.
It's only been on my radar, really, for the last 6 months, I'd say. I mean, who knows what the extent of the problem is and how long it's going to take to rectify, and in a way, the easiest solution will be to put a plaster on it for the next few years.
They knew nothing of the immediate safety concerns here when the school year ended in July. Even in August, only a longer-term action plan was presented to address the risks from RAC. It was only on Thursday, with pupils preparing to return here next week, came the order to shut half of these classrooms due to the immediate dangers.
22 classrooms and as many other rooms are now out of bounds here. Temporary buildings are being sought and funding to rebuild. But for now, virtual lessons will return 2 years after the COVID disruption ended, frustrating pupils and their parents.
It's been known prior to the summer holidays, even before that there was a problem. And then suddenly, 2 days ago, it's been moved from low risk to actually closing at least half of their classrooms, which is just unbelievable.
I've just had a child finish at Honeywood, so she's been here 5 years and there's been no whiff of a problem at all. You know, the first we'd heard of it was the other day, or yesterday, I believe it was. So you do sort of wonder how imminent this danger really is.
Unions are blaming years of underfunding in infrastructure.
It's not just schools that are impacted. We don't know the status of other public sector buildings such as hospitals. What has been happening, really, is this government has chipped away at the fabric of the very institutions that safeguard our communities over the last 13 years that they've been in government.
For years, the government has known about the risks to building made with crumbling concrete. Only now has the scale of the problem been revealed. classrooms forced to close, leaving schools scrambling to find solutions to limit damage to learning. Rob Harris, Sky News, Essex.
The risk posed by rock concrete collapse goes much wider than schools. The material is used in public buildings from hospitals and courts to shopping centres. Residential properties could also be at risk, with one expert comparing the potential threat to the cladding crisis. Labour has called for an urgent audit to establish the full scale of the number of buildings at risk. The Liberal Democrats want the government to hold a Cobra meeting to deal with what they describe as a national emergency. Sky's political correspondent Ali Fortescue reports.
Every time we have a downpour, this is what happens.
Beyond the latest concrete warnings, the cost of repairing crumbling classrooms was already mounting. These schools sent us videos of sewage leaks, buildings falling into disrepair. Capital spending on education is half what it was in 2010.
We've got 700,000 pupils in England who are in school buildings that are not adequate.
And as buildings now face closure over aerated concrete, the big question, why has it taken so long?
Where are you going to get the people, the equipment, the physical properties that you need? Even the temporary classrooms are going to be challenging on this scale. So on the committee, we look at managing risk, and we think that really, on this, you need to plan ahead.
And now documents suggest complaints have been made about rack concrete for decades. Experts warning it isn't a proper form of concrete and calling it a booby trap for unsuspecting engineers.
We test our cars to make sure they're safe with an MOT test, but we really don't worry about the buildings that we work in and the buildings that we live in. This is why structures are falling down, because we do not maintain and inspect to make sure they're safe.
The full scale of this is only just becoming clear. Up and down the country, hospitals in places like Nottinghamshire, Stoke, Kidderminster and Surrey, police stations in places like Scotland at risk.
I think there's a great deal to be concerned about, and that's why the Liberal Democrats are calling for Rishi Sunak to convene a Cobra meeting. And we need to know now what the potential risks to members of the public are in using those buildings, but also what's the likelihood that those buildings are going to have to be closed in the near future.
We haven't heard from the government today, instead this.
We're working to make sure that there is minimal disruption to education.
A video of the Secretary of State answering questions on X, formerly known as Twitter. The government have said they'd cover the cost of any alternative accommodation required.
It has not been a great summer recess for this government. No shift in the dire polls, and their policy, particularly on immigration, has been under fire the last few months. What the Prime Minister definitely doesn't need as he tries to turn things round and head towards a general election is parents in limbo over school closures.
On Monday, MPs will be back here, a Prime Minister hoping to reset, facing a very visual metaphor of a crumbling country. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Westminster.
Up to 3,000 jobs are at risk at the Port Talbot steelworks in South Wales, despite a deal that Sky News understands is close to being agreed to secure its future. The government is in advanced talks to agree a £500 million aid package aimed at securing the long-term future of the plant. Port Talbot's Indian parent company, Tata Steel, is also planning to commit £700 million of investment over several years. Despite this, industry sources close to the discussions have told Sky News that as many as 3,000 staff remain likely to lose their jobs in the long term. Adele Robinson reports from Port Talbot.
Without this, you may as well take the word port out of Port Talbot. Without the steel industry, we have nothing, absolutely nothing. It's in our blood.
The fate of Britain's largest steelmaking plant looms large. And as the steam rises here, so does a new deal to secure its future, but at a potential cost, thousands of job cuts. Gary works here. He's worried.
I have a son who works here. I wish him to have the same opportunity as I had. I've worked, as I said earlier, 34, 35 years, so I'd like him to have the same opportunity. There's lots of fathers and sons and daughters involved in this industry. It is our life, it's in our blood, our DNA, the steelworks. So I just want to see the longevity and may it long continue.
Sky News understands the government is close to agreeing a deal offering up £500 million. That alongside £700 million more from the owners Tata Steel to decarbonise the plant. But one union says replacing blast furnaces with greener electric arc ones would mean certain types of steel couldn't be made and more jobs in supply chains lost.
So if the transition to electric arc was there, Trosser would have to shut. And we've told the company that we don't believe that electric arc is the only way forward. You could go DRI, you could go hydrogen, which would secure more jobs.
However, questions have been raised over the viability of the UK's steel industry. It only generates 0.1% of GDP. But the government has clearly decided that there is a need for a domestic steel industry. It's a question of security. With unpredictable world events, it wants to protect supply chains and jobs, but also ensure that we're not reliant on imports from other countries for critical infrastructure materials like steel. Up to 3,000 jobs could be lost in the long term under the New Deal, which is yet to be finalised.
My plea to the government and Tata Steel is don't make British steel workers compete with one hand tied behind their backs again. Don't fail to make the investment that's required to ensure that we make that transition to a greener steel making, but whilst keeping our customer base and keeping our plants viable and competitive.
The government won't comment on talks, but say they're committed to securing a decarbonised and competitive future for the industry. Tata Steel point to European governments actively supporting companies to go greener.
Supporters will say it's about time that the government steps up to help these businesses decarbonise from an environmental ground. Doubters and sceptics will say that the government is simply throwing good money after bad. It's never really consistently made a profit. And they will say steel is a commodity, just let somebody else produce it for us. Thank you very much.
A proud part of Britain's industrial heritage, this site is also the single biggest greenhouse gas emitter in the country. That can't go on, but there'll be a cost, and it could be decided within weeks. Adele Robinson, Sky News, South Wales.
More than 150 people have been injured in violent protests in Tel Aviv between Eritrean asylum seekers and Israeli police. Officers in riot gear and on horseback tried to control a demonstration organised by the Eritrean embassy as the regime's supporters clashed with its opponents and protesters broke through barricades and hurled stones at police. Those injured include at least 3 people believed to have been shot by police firing live rounds. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
Police in Tel Aviv had been warned that there might be violence, but they were taken by surprise. Hundreds of Eritrean asylum seekers marched on the Eritrean embassy in Tel Aviv to protest against the dictatorship back home. When police tried to prevent them from reaching there, it turned violent. More than 150 people were injured, including 30 police officers. Israeli police fired tear gas, rubber bullets and stun grenades. Live rounds were also fired in the air, but a number of victims were reportedly treated in hospital with gunshot wounds.
To my sorrow, since the morning, the two sides did not keep their commitments and did stand by the licence to protest given to them. They arrived here since the early morning with the intention to sabotage the event. We were deployed with reinforcements since this morning and also overnight, because we had information they planned to burn down the club.
Mid-afternoon, and the clashes started again between Eritrean opposition and pro-government supporters. Cars were smashed and they broke shop windows. Police told Tel Aviv residents to stay indoors.
The people that support the Eritrean, the dictator, they come and they scare them. They come and they fight with them on the street. This is not a fight against an idea or against the system. This is a fight for their lives.
By late afternoon, the situation was under control and many of the protesters were arrested. Similar protests have taken place across the world recently. Hospitals in Tel Aviv declared mass emergency situations, and one said that they hadn't seen a single incident like this since the Second Palestinian Intifada 20 years ago. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Israel.
People have been sharing their memories of Mohamed Al-Fayed today after his death at the age of 94 was announced last night. Mr. Al-Fayed was a controversial figure who rose from a poor background in Egypt to become the owner of the Harrods store in London and Fulham Football Club. But after his son Dodi died in a car crash with Princess Diana in 1997, he claimed they were the victims of a plot orchestrated by the British establishment. Sabah Chowdhury reports.
For many, he will be remembered as the man who owned Harrods and who revolutionised the experience of the department store. From supermodels to pop icons to stars of the silver screen, Mohamed Al-Fayed lived a life larger than most. But despite a world of opulence and fame, the Egyptian billionaire's later years were forever tainted by the tragic events of August 1997, when his firstborn son Dodi was killed in a car crash alongside Diana, Princess of Wales. Those who knew him best say no amount of money could ever compensate for the grief that he endured.
When Dodi and Diana were killed that night, Mohamed's world changed forever. He was very stoic, he was very brave. He showed great steadfastness during that week. I knew him very well, and I could see the sadness at the back of his eyes. But he said, Michael, I can't walk around looking sad. I've got 7,000 employees. I've got a family. I've got people looking to me for leadership. I have to put on a smile and carry on. But it was never the same.
That same year, Al-Fayed purchased Fulham FC for £6 million. Popular with fans, he took the club from the third tier to the Premier League, where it remained during his tenure. Not so popular, though, was this statue he erected of his friend Michael Jackson after the superstar attended a football game. It was seen by many fans as an eyesore and eventually taken down. Never one to be swayed on his decisions, Al-Fayed reportedly told fans if they didn't like it, they could go to hell. From football, his riches also extended to philanthropy. But with the good also came a checkered past. The business tycoon was forced to pay thousands in lawsuits following allegations of sexual harassment, bullying and discrimination from Harrods employees. And he was in part denied a British passport for giving MPs lavish gifts and thousands of pounds in exchange for questions in the Commons.
Oh, look, a gift bag. Special gifts for the boss lady.
Ah, that it gets me anyway. Boss lady seems allergic to me.
Al-Fayed's colourful and controversial life has been forever immortalised in Netflix's critically acclaimed series, The Crown.
Diana.
Mohamed, but you must call me Momo.
And this weekend, one final fitting tribute from the fans that adored him. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News.
Police in Northern Ireland have arrested 2 men in connection to a large-scale data breach that compromised the identities of serving police officers and staff. Posting on X, Police Service Northern Ireland said, "We have arrested 2 men, aged 21 and 22, under the Terrorism Act following a search in the Portadown area on Saturday, September the 2nd. The arrests are part of our investigation into criminality linked to the Freedom of Information data breach." There's more disruption on the rail network this weekend, with 2 unions taking industrial action. Members of the ASLEF union followed yesterday's strike with a ban on overtime. Plus, up to 20,000 RMT members across 14 operators have walked out. It follows the Rail Delivery Group's rejection of a letter outlining a roadmap to a resolution. US President Joe Biden visited northern Florida this afternoon to survey the damage left by Hurricane Adelia. The president met with local residents as the state grapples with widespread devastation following the storm, which struck Florida's Gulf Coast on Wednesday. Thousands of festival goers at Nevada's Burning Man Festival have been told to put the party on hold, take shelter and conserve food and water after heavy rain turned the site into a mud bath. Access in and out of the campsite has been halted, according to the event's organisers, leaving roughly 70,000 attendees stranded there. An Indian rocket has begun a 4-month journey towards the sun, bound for what's been described as a parking lot in space. When it gets there, it will study solar winds, which can cause disturbance here on Earth. The mission follows India's successful moon landing last week. Milena Veselinovic has more details.
3, 2, 1, 0.
A successful blast-off for India's first ever solar mission, on a voyage to decode the mysteries of our closest star. The craft, called Aditya L1, meaning the sun in Hindi, now travelling to the observation point, 1.5 million kilometres away.
The Aditya L1 will take its journey after some Earth maneuvers. It will start its journey to the L1 point, a very long journey of almost 125 days. So let us wish all the very best to Aditya spacecraft.
The craft will study solar winds, which can disturb the Earth's communication satellites, and examine just how the sun impacts on the Earth's climate patterns. Fresh off another launch just 10 days ago, when India became the first nation ever to land a spacecraft on the moon's southern region. A point of pride for India's Prime Minister and for those watching the launch today.
These 17,000 scientists are doing their best jobs and to lifting India.
Privileged to be an Indian and witness this kind of developmental activities on the Space Center for India.
Aditya L1 satellite separated.
A country spending just a fraction of what the US and China invest in space exploration, but punching well above its weight.
India has had a plan and a strategy that is going to, get a seat at the top table with these major spacefaring nations, and they have been very successful, as you say. So they've picked key challenges and really decided where they can make a difference and really contribute on the international stage.
A stage that now eagerly awaits what this solar mission might uncover. Milena Veselinovic, Sky News.
The Venice Film Festival got underway this weekend with a prestigious event rather quiet as the Hollywood writers and actors strike continues. Sky's Fraser Maud has more details.
A lonely walk down one of the movie world's most lauded red carpets. A strike by SAG-AFTRA, the union representing US film and TV actors, over demands for improved contracts from streaming sites and film studios, prohibits its members from promoting their new releases. So director Wes Anderson, here to premiere his short film, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, is having to do it without its stars. Yorgos Lanthimos was another visionary director left to showcase his latest film, Poor Things. A-listers Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe and Mark Ruffalo all staying away from the premiere due to the ongoing dispute. Some Hollywood stars were able to tread the red, though. But Adam Driver, allowed to attend the premiere of his high-octane biopic about Enzo Ferrari because it's an independent production, still used the opportunity to voice support for his fellow actors.
Why is it that a distribution company, a smaller distribution company, like Neon and STX International, can meet the dream demands of what SAG is asking for? And this is pre-negotiation, the dream version of SAG's wish list, but a big company like Netflix and Amazon can't.
Actors in the US went on strike in July, with some of the industry's biggest names taking to the picket lines. The potential impact of the Hollywood strike on productions here is complicated. The UK Actors Union Equity currently isn't in dispute, but some of its members are also members of SAG-AFTRA, and many others share similar concerns with their American counterparts over issues such as secondary payments and the use of artificial intelligence.
One struggle, one fight. We support SAG-AFTRA strike.
In the UK, there have already been solidarity demonstrations.
They're dealing with the same employers as well, because we're in a global industry. We're talking to the same high-end TV employers, same feature film employers as well.
Get over the sidewalk. Thank you.
Venice is the first international event to feel the impact of the industrial action. But it's the studios and the streaming platforms who ultimately have the power to script a Hollywood ending for their stars. Fraser Maud, Sky News.
Time now to get all the latest sports news from Matt.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Last month, Chelsea head coach Mauricio Pochettino made a huge statement about defender Levi Colwill, saying he can be one of the greatest centre-backs in England. Colwill impressed last season whilst on loan at Brighton and also lifted the under-21 Euros with England this summer. Our reporter James Savundra sat down with the Chelsea centre-back to reflect on his career so far.
Levi, you've been coming here to this training ground since the age of 8. How vindicated already are you feeling about committing your future to this club?
Yeah, of course. You know, this is my home. Like I said, I've been here since 8. It's all I know. I love this place, and you know, it's a blessing to be able to be here for many more years.
New manager started work at the beginning of July. What were the first conversations that you had with Mauricio Pochettino?
I think the first one he asked me was about my holiday. I think it was a bit more of a personal question, and from there I kind of got his vibe, realised what sort of person he was, and yeah, it was good talking to him and seeing what person he was, and yeah, being comfortable around him.
And after all the success you had last season, were you looking for assurances about what sort of role you may have at Chelsea here this year?
Not necessarily. I just wanted to know if I have the chance to, you know, train hard and push myself into the team. I didn't want to talk to the manager and be like, I want to play none of this, because that's not what person I am. I just wanted to know, like, if I push myself, hopefully I get a chance. And he said, yeah, you train well, you know, if you get the chance, you've got to keep it, keep your shirt. And then, yeah, that's been it.
And how good did it feel when you heard him speak about you in pre-season, saying you had the ability to become one of the greatest centre-backs in England?
Yeah, I think when a manager has confidence in you, it allows you to play your best football. I definitely feel that with him. He trusts me, and I think that's made such a big difference, and that's why I feel so comfortable around him and the team already.
And how much confidence does it give you, the track record the manager has working with young players and progressing young players at elite clubs?
Yeah, of course, he's an amazing coach. He's helped young players in the past, and when I have spoke to people about him, they said he's been perfect. So, you know, hopefully he teaches me a lot, and I learn from him and become a better player.
And as we said, having come here at the age of 8, signing on your 9th birthday, what did it then mean for you to make your Premier League debut for Chelsea against Liverpool on the opening weekend of the season?
It meant everything. Like, it kind of didn't feel real walking out, because, you know, I've been a little boy in the stands, chanting, and then to be walking out as a player and looking at the stands where I was, seeing my parents, it's a dream come true.
And just going back to last season, just how important do you think that experience was with Brighton for preparing yourself for what you're doing and what you'll hopefully be doing this season for Chelsea?
Yeah, of course. I learnt so much at Brighton, not even just as a player, but also as a person. At the start, you know, I wasn't playing, and it was tough, mentally tough, not being able to play, because, you know, you're not getting in the team, or there's been a new manager coming in, so, you know, it was hard. But, you know, I dealt with it well. I didn't complain. I just got on with it, worked hard every day, and then when I did get my chance, you know, I took it. When De Zerbi came in, obviously he's playing good football, and it helped me out. And yeah, it's built me to where I am today, and I'm happy it happened.
Going back to the first day of the season, 6 players made their debut for Chelsea against Liverpool. What's it been like here over the last few weeks with the high turnover of players leaving the club, but exciting additions coming in?
Yeah, exactly that. You said it. It's been exciting. The new players coming in, obviously a majority of us are young, so hungry. We want to come in and you want to come and claim your place. Simple as that. I think it's been a really good environment. Everyone wants to learn. Everyone wants to work hard, and we all enjoy each other's company. I think that's the best thing. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting season.
Does it feel like this is the start of a new era for the club where youth very much is at the core?
100%. Even for players in the academy, if you look into the first team squad, how young everyone is, it's something to look up to. I think that's what Chelsea's about, with all the academy players that came through in the past, the great players like Connor, Reece, we've got here now. Yeah, it's exciting. It's a good place to be right now.
We speak a lot about the young players, but it must be pretty special playing alongside Thiago Silva. I think I'm right in saying he made his professional debut back in 2002, which is before you were even born.
Yeah, that's correct.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including this story on the front of The Observer. Their headline, Whistleblower Reveals Culture of Complacency on school safety. Tonight, I'm joined by the assistant editor of the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. Do stay with us for more.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. A head teacher has told Sky News he's been forced to close half of the classrooms in his school because of unsafe concrete, as calls grow for an investigation into a number of buildings, including hospitals and courtrooms. Sky News understands the government is in talks to provide a £500 million aid package to secure the future of the Port Talbot steelworks, but the deal could still result in the loss of thousands of jobs. More than 150 people, including 30 police officers, have been injured in protests in Tel Aviv in clashes between Eritrean asylum seekers who support their government and opponents of the regime. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the assistant editor of the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Sunday Telegraph leads on climate advisors' demands for ministers to halt the expansion of airports. The headline, Sunak defies net zero ban on new airports. The civil service whistleblower has revealed a culture of complacency on school safety. That's on the front of The Observer. While the Sunday People says that 7,000 more schools are at risk of closure. And that story also leads the front of the Sunday Times. The Mail on Sunday quotes Tesco boss Ken Murphy, who says our staff need body cameras to end attacks. MOD hit by hackers, reads the front of the Sunday Mirror. The Sunday Express reports on the Chancellor saying the government is on track to meet its pledge to halve inflation by the end of the year. And I've found my Mr. Ride. The Star reports on a woman who has fallen in love with a roller coaster. For the second time, apparently. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Laura Armstrong from the Sunday Mirror and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. Welcome to you both. We're not going to talk about the Star, don't worry. We are starting with the Sunday People and the story that's been ongoing for the past few days, the state of our schools, and later we find out other public buildings because of this crumbling concrete crisis. Jake.
Yes, the Sunday People is suggesting that 7,000 more schools may be at risk of having this crumbling concrete, which will likely result in supports and struts having to be put into these schools to keep them up, to make sure the children are safe when they come to school. But until that happens, kids are going to be off school again after the pandemic harmed their education so badly over the past 2 or 3 years. It's the last thing that children need, especially as we've had teacher strikes as well, harming their education and their progress on top of that. So there's been a lot in the papers about this recently, and a lot about this again in Sunday's papers. The Observer, the Telegraph, it's all over the place. The Observer has a whistleblower from within the Department of Education suggesting that the Tories were dangerously complacent and wanted to save money rather than look at the structural problems. I mean, the fact that a hand grenade has been lobbed from the civil service into the Tory party comes as no surprise, I think, in this context. But nonetheless, there does seem to be a bit of incompetence, shall we say, in getting to grips, or failing to get to grips with this problem, that's compounded by the fact the government is not releasing the list of schools that are going to be affected, leaving a lot of parents in limbo.
Yes, and the timing has to be the big factor in this, Laura, that children go back to school on Monday, a lot of children go back on Monday, and this was certainly known about way before the start of the summer, in fact, possibly years before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, from the very first that these buildings were built, they always had a finite shelf life. They were always going to reach the end of their natural life in the 1990s. And there have been warnings back as far as 1995 to indicate that this was about to become a problem. You know, in 2018, there was a school in Kent that its roof caved in. And at that point, obviously, it won some further attention. Luckily, in that instance, no one was there, no one was harmed. But it didn't prompt those big changes that you would expect in such a near miss. You know, and it's well documented that this is a problem that was coming. You know, in 2020, the Department of Education recommended that 5.3 billion a year be spent on rebuilding some of these structures. And in the last 6 years, just 2.3 billion has been spent. They really have dropped the ball on this one. And they put it on the back burner. And as Jake says, it's the kids that are paying the price for it, because they're in some cases, their education is being disrupted, you know, for the 3rd consecutive year. And it adds insult to injury that we're not getting the full picture of which schools are affected and how badly. You know, the government are hiding behind this sort of line that we're not telling anyone until the parents have been made aware. But for thousands and thousands of parents, you know, I'm one of them, you're waiting to hear if that's going to be you. And it just adds insult to injury.
And so close to the start of term. Jake, tell us a bit more about this whistleblower. We'll move to the Observer, the senior civil service whistleblower who worked in the private office of Nadeem Zahawi when he was then Education Secretary. And he's saying that, the whistleblower that is, he said ministers and special advisors were trying to get away with spending as little as they could and hoping to make do rather than treating the problem with the urgency it required.
Yes, I mean, I touched on this just now, that the Observer have got hold of this whistleblower, anonymous whistleblower who's working in the private office of Nadeem Zahawi when he was Education Secretary. And this whistleblower is making pretty predictable criticisms of the Tory Education Secretary, saying that he was dangerously complacent, or ministers in general were dangerously complacent. They were more concerned with saving money than improving safety, and trying to get away with spending as little as they could, as if this is some sort of manifestation of Tory miserliness. And, you know, trying to save money is a good thing in the public sector, not spending money when it doesn't need to be spent. On this occasion, obviously, money did need to be spent, and that was an error. But I'm not sure that it's really fair to pin it on some kind of inherent Tory quality to be miserly and not to want to invest in the infrastructure and in the public sector. But certainly, this is a problem that does need to be addressed. But, you know, one word of defence of the ministers and the Department of Education over the past few years. They've had a lot to deal with. You know, the pandemic, for one thing, has been devastating, and, you know, the schools minister, the education minister has had a lot on their plate to deal with that. And they haven't performed particularly well in many cases, keeping kids away from schools when they should have got them in school, in my opinion. But there's been lots to deal with there. There's been an economic crisis. There's been the war in Ukraine, budgets. There's been inflation, sky-high cost of living. All of these things have been piling up, and that's led them to take their eye off the ball. I'm not saying they should not. They're right to take their eye off the ball. They should have dealt with this earlier, but I can see how they've lost control of this thing.
Laura, do you agree? Do you think they can be defended in this scenario? When we look at the Sunday Telegraph, they're suggesting that pupils could face years of misery over the crumbling concrete. 2005 was the reported year that it might come to a conclusion.
I mean, yes, I see. I mean, the fact that disturbed me the most in that piece is the line that says there's no target date for eliminating the potentially dangerous material. Where does that leave us? You know, there are reports also in other papers that these buildings, these temporary buildings that are going to be put up potentially for decades in order to ensure that the buildings themselves that are affected with wreck are going to be safe. I mean, I think in the government's defence, I do think there were a lot of red flags that were missed here, but the one crucial defence is that there's no children harmed. Like, luckily, in that case in 2018 in Kent, no one was in the building at the time. This has been reacted on before anyone has actually got hurt.
Let's move on just before the break and have a look at the Sunday Express. And Rishi Sunak apparently on course to fulfil his key promise to the nation and halve inflation. And the Chancellor saying that they've proved the doubters wrong, and they'll be planned to cut inflation even further. Our plan is working. The government's unlocking the UK's potential. Jake.
This is the build-up to the Chancellor's autumn statement, which is coming out soon. Jeremy Hunt he's on the front of the Express, as we can see, and he's across the papers as well, elsewhere, writing for the Sunday Telegraph as well. And the sort of background to this is that the right of the Tory party is clamouring for tax cuts. Tax burden is sky-high, highest it's been since the Second World War. It does need to come down if we want to see proper growth. We had some good economic news a few days ago saying that we'd been too negative about Britain, and actually we are doing quite well by comparison to the other G7 countries. But we do need to see tax cuts in the view of the Tory right, and I can see that. But Jeremy Hunt, what he's saying is that he wants to get inflation down to 2%. And that's interesting because in January, he promised to halve inflation, which then was at 10%, so that would have been to 5%. Now he's setting a further goal of 2%, which is the target that Gordon Brown set the Bank of England back in 2003. So it seems as if he's pushing tax cuts further off down the road until we hit this 2% target. And that was reinforced by Michael Gove saying in a podcast to the FT that tax cuts weren't going to happen anytime soon, effectively. And so this is, in a way, the undercurrent of this is a rebuke to the Tory right.
OK, we are going to take a break. When we come back, Much more on climate advisors' demands for ministers to halt the expansion of airports. Do stay with us.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
So the SS Express was an incredibly important ship for the local islanders of both the Orkney and the Shetland, and it was used to go and supply the islands with normal goods and produce from the mainland, and it would come up from Leith in Scotland to Kirkwall and offload its general goods. And this was happening during World War I. It was a replacement for the wreck of the ship, the Ruby, which actually the same team of researchers found a couple of years ago. And it was so important for the islanders because it gave them the actual produce they required to survive. It collided with the HMS Grenville, or I'll rephrase that, HMS Grenville collided with it. And it was at night. It wasn't known what had actually struck. It never knew that it had actually struck the SS Express. And it was due to the tireless research of Kevin Heath from Lost in Waters Deep, who went through all the wreck research, the sonar imagery, and found an image of what looked like a wreck on the seabed in an approximate position to where HMS Grenville believed it had struck a vessel. That enabled us an opportunity on an expedition which we were conducting up in the Orkney, between Orkney and Shetland, to go and visit it, to go and try and create a positive identification. So it took a long time to identify because, one, we needed the sonar imagery of the local area. That's only become more apparent over the last decade, 2 decades, where we've had the facilities and the vessels to actually go and create the sonar imagery. But also, all the other conditions. You need an incredible dive team. You need an incredible boat or diving support vessel, which enables us to go and do it. And literally, you need the weather and the conditions. We had all of them, and with the great research provided by Lost in Waters Deep, enabled us to go down and positively identify this remarkably historically important for the Orkney Islands wreck. The next plan, if it was possible, would be to actually create kind of 3D imagery of the wreck, and then it kind of brings it back to life as such. And more importantly is what the relatives would like to do. It's offering them closure to what was their grave of their ancestors and relatives, and we want to make sure that we respect that in the highest possible way.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, the assistant editor at the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons. Let's take a look in this section, starting off with the Sunday Telegraph and this story about Rishi Sunak facing down the government's climate advisors over demands for ministers to halt the expansion of airports. Take us into this story, Laura.
Yes, so this is a very bold move by the Prime Minister. He is choosing to reject the formal advice by the Climate Change Committee that all airport expansions must be halted, which is going to pave the way for significant expansions at Bristol, Southampton, possibly Gatwick, City, Heathrow. They're all going to embark on major projects. And obviously this is about growth for the Prime Minister. But obviously the significant marker in it is that he's saying, you know, he's drawing a line in the sand between him and net zero and deciding to go with it. And I wonder whether this is a reaction in part to the Uxbridge by-election and the defeat there. He's obviously seen what has happened here and how the ULEZ tax has cost Labour that seat, and perhaps thought, maybe I'm in a better position prioritising growth over the environment in this case. As I say, it's a very, very bold move. There have been signs as well so far that he's very keen, and as in fact all Tory MPs seem quite keen to sort of position Keir Starmer as the eco-zealot. You know, every chance they get, they refer to the donations made by Just Stop Oil's Dale Vince. There have been a lot of references to Alistair Strathern, who is the Labour candidate in Nadine Dorries' constituency, his appearance as a zombie at the Greenpeace protest, which has him now currently on unpaid leave, I believe. So it seems like he's watching all of this and continuing that road in the hope that it wins them more votes.
Jake, do you agree with that analysis, that potentially this is a rowing back on green credentials, as it were?
Well, I think that I'm not sure that it's a rowing back in terms of the target that the government wants to go for, which is net zero, which isn't in dispute. I think it's the road the government's going to take to get there. And as Laura said, the Uxbridge by-election recently was widely seen as a referendum, not just on ULEZ, but also on the government's position on net zero and the way in which it's, many people feel, hobbling our economic progress in advance of green ambitions. And that's meant higher bills for people, higher taxes. The cost of living's going up and it's contributing to that. And now Rishi Sunak seems to be taking that new orientation of maybe slower progress towards net zero in order not to compromise our economic growth by rejecting the Climate Change Committee's formal advice that airport expansions be halted. So there are some airports that would like to expand, Bristol and Southampton in particular, the third runway. Those appear to be going ahead now. And I think that's overall a good thing, especially if we bear in mind the fact that China's CO2 emissions are 33 times our own, and they're going up. Even if we hit net zero tomorrow, we wouldn't make much difference to the fate of the world in many ways. And so I think that net zero is a good idea. We've got to show that leadership, but without compromising too much our economic growth.
We still have to do our bit despite the rest of the world, don't we? Let's move on to the Mail. And this is quite a disturbing story. The Tesco boss is saying that his staff need to have body cameras because of the level of attacks that they're having to undergo. Laura?
Yes, I mean, I'm quite pleased at this move, to be honest, because I think there's been an awful lot of coverage of the sort of broken Britain that the Mail describes here. We've seen lots of disturbing stories about stores having to place security tags on chocolate and things like that, because obviously amid the cost of living crisis, some people are desperate and some people are taking advantage. But also there has been, it seems, a sort of attitude developed that the police won't do anything about it for minor shoplifting, and it has led to an epidemic of sorts. Obviously, you see an extreme example in the riots of the JD Sports situation on Oxford Street, where it was just stormed by thugs in balaclavas who obviously felt that they could take that move. But at a lower level, there's also been many anecdotes of ordinary shopkeepers who are just, you know, in very small businesses who are in a position where people come in and steal stuff from them quite openly and brazenly, and they feel they can do nothing to stop them. So obviously this is very much Tesco, not a small business at all, but I think it's a strong move to tackle that kind of crime, and I think it's very welcome.
Yes, the Chief Executive, Ken Murphy, saying that officers currently fail to attend more than 2/3 of serious retail crimes, and that despite the fact that shoplifting costs businesses almost £1 billion a year.
That's right. I mean, those two statistics. The first is that 200 Tesco workers are victims of serious physical assault every month. That's one statistic. The other is the one that you pointed out, that police officers, fail to attend more than 2/3 of serious retail crimes. Those two things should not lead to Tesco staff having to wear body cameras. They should lead to greater action from the police to stop this stuff. And the new Commissioner, Mark Rowley, has shown a new direction for the police, where they're supposed to be attending every burglary, pursuing every crime, not sitting back and painting their police cars rainbow colours and engaging in identity politics while crime runs rampant. And hopefully this will begin to make a difference. But more action is needed more quickly to combat this epidemic of crime in Tesco.
Indeed. Jake and Laura, thank you very much for the moment. We'll see you in the 11 o'clock hour. But for the minute, let's take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That may be the meteorological autumn, but the next few days will feel more like summer, with high pressure dominating. The far north of Scotland will start Sunday wet and windy, but most other places do look dry. Early low cloud, mist and fog will lift during the morning to leave plenty of sunshine across the UK and Ireland. Northwestern parts will be the exception, though, with cloud lingering there, which will bring spells of rain to the windy northwest of Scotland. It'll be warmer than today for most, with a high of 27 Celsius, 81 Fahrenheit, possible in the south. The afternoon will bring little change, but northwest Scotland will see the wind and rain easing. The mostly settled conditions will continue on Monday. It'll be very warm and sunny once early cloud and fog lifts, but the northern and western Isles will see wind and rain again. The rest of the week looks mainly fine too, with temperatures rising further to reach heat wave.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.